Welcome to Her Secret Truth, a place where the truth always comes out. Here you'll hear stories of family betrayals, hidden secrets, and shocking revelations. Every story is a step closer to the truth someone tried to hide. Subscribe to Her Secret Truth so you don't miss new stories you won't be able to stop watching. The morning I drove downtown to settle my husband's estate, I thought I was finally closing the worst chapter of my life. Instead, a stranger in a parking garage warned me that my own daughter-in-law was trying to steal everything Vincent left behind. And by the end of that meeting, she collapsed right there in front of everyone. I'm glad you're here with me. Before I continue, tell me what city you're watching from. I'd love to know how far this story has traveled. At 64, I honestly believed life had already shown me every kind of heartbreak. Losing Vincent 3 months earlier had nearly broken me. 42 years together doesn't disappear quietly. Every room in the house still carried him somehow. His coffee mug beside the sink. His reading glasses on the end table. The soft dent in his pillow that I still couldn't bring myself to fix. But I was surviving. One slow day at a time. That Tuesday morning started with a phone call from Ashford and Pierce Legal Group, Vincent's law firm. Mrs. Blackwood, we're ready to proceed with the estate settlement. Can you come in at 11 today? The woman's voice sounded polished and impatient, like she had a dozen more calls waiting behind mine. I agreed immediately. After months of delays and paperwork, I wanted this over with. Vincent's will had always been simple. We discussed it many times through the years. Everything passed to me first, and after my time, our son Damien and his family would inherit the rest. Nothing complicated. At least that's what I believed. I stood in my bedroom afterward staring into the mirror, while fastening the pearl necklace Vincent gave me on our wedding day. I chose the navy dress he always loved, the one he bought me for our 35th anniversary. The woman staring back at me looked tired. Older. Grief had a way of aging you quietly. The silver in my hair had spread faster these past few months, and the skin around my eyes seemed thinner somehow. Still, I pulled myself together and headed downtown. Traffic crawled the entire way. By the time I reached the parking garage beneath the law offices, my nerves were already frayed. I couldn't explain why I felt uneasy. Something just sat wrong in my chest. I parked, turned off the engine, and reached for my purse and paperwork. That's when I heard someone shouting behind me. Ma'am, wait. I turned sharply. A man stepped out from behind one of the concrete pillars. He looked rough around the edges. Worn boots. Faded jeans. A jacket that had clearly seen too many winters. His beard was patchy, his hair uncombed. My first instinct was fear. Vincent always hated when I walked through garages alone. But then the man got closer, and I noticed something unexpected in his expression. Concern. Please, he said carefully, keeping his distance. I need to tell you something important. You're Mrs. Blackwood, right? Vincent Blackwood's wife. My stomach tightened instantly. How do you know my husband? I worked upstairs. Ashford and Pierce Legal Group. I was let go a few weeks ago. I gripped my purse tighter. I think you should leave me alone. Ma'am, please listen before you go up there. Something in his voice stopped me cold. Not panic. Urgency. The kind that comes from somebody carrying information too heavy to ignore. He glanced around the garage before lowering his voice. Your daughter-in-law has been working with people inside that office. For a second, I genuinely thought I misheard him. Arabella. He nodded. There are documents being prepared. They've been telling people you aren't mentally fit to manage your husband's estate. I stared at him. The words didn't even make sense at first. What are you talking about? She's been claiming you're forgetful, confused, unstable. She told Mr. Ashford there was a chance you wouldn't even remember today's appointment. My blood ran cold. I actually grabbed the side of the car to steady myself. That's absurd, I whispered. I'm perfectly capable of handling my own affairs. I know you are. His answer came fast, almost angry on my behalf. That's why I waited here hoping I could catch you before the meeting. I looked at him more carefully then. He wasn't acting like a scammer. If anything, he looked terrified. There's more, he said quietly. They've been creating paperwork that makes it look like your husband wanted changes made to the will before he passed. I felt sick. Changes. Documents saying he worried about your mental condition. Financial judgment. Things like that. For a moment, the entire garage seemed to tilt around me. Vincent would never have said those things. Never. I handled most of our finances our entire marriage. Bills, taxes, investments. Half the time Vincent joked he'd be lost without me. Why are you telling me this? I finally asked. The man hesitated before answering. Because your husband treated people decently. That matters more than you think. His eyes shifted toward the elevators again. My name's Nico Moretti. I worked there 12 years before they got rid of me. 12 years. He gave a bitter laugh. I knew too much. A chill crawled up my arms. What does that mean? It means this isn't the first family they've done this to. I just stared at him. They help certain clients reshape estates. He continued carefully. Remove obstacles. Create leverage. Your daughter-in-law has been paying very good money for their help. I felt like somebody had punched the air out of my lungs. Arabella? The same woman who hugged me at church every Sunday? Who brought me soup after Vincent died? Who cried at the funeral holding my hand? Nico stepped back slightly when the elevator doors opened nearby. Don't sign anything today, he warned me. Read every word. And don't let them pressure you. Before I could ask another question, he disappeared between the parked cars. Just like that. Gone. I stood there alone for nearly a full minute, trying to steady my breathing. Part of me wanted to dismiss everything as nonsense from a disgruntled former employee. But another part of me, the deeper part, the part women learn to trust after decades of surviving disappointment, knew something was wrong. And suddenly, little moments with Arabella over the years started replaying differently in my mind. The more I thought about Nico's warning, the more old memories started rearranging themselves in my mind. Little things I once ignored suddenly felt different. The quiet whispers between Arabella and Damien whenever I entered a room. The way Arabella gently redirected conversations anytime I talked too long about Vincent. The strained smile she wore whenever someone mentioned how organized I'd always been with money. At the time I told myself I was imagining things. Now I wasn't so sure. The elevator finally reached the 15th floor. When the doors opened, I stepped into the polished lobby of Ashford and Pierce Legal Group. Everything looked exactly as it always had. Dark mahogany furniture. Expensive artwork. Soft classical music drifting through hidden speakers. But this time the place didn't feel elegant. It felt cold. Manufactured. Like every polished surface was hiding something rotten underneath. The receptionist looked up with a rehearsed smile. Mrs. Blackwood. They're waiting for you in conference room A. I thanked her quietly and walked down the long marble hallway. My heels echoed sharply against the floor, the sound almost unnerving in the silence around me. Most of the office doors were shut. Behind a few of them, I caught fragments of hushed conversations that stopped the second I passed. By the time I reached the conference room, my stomach was tied in knots. I paused with my hand on the brass handle. Through the frosted glass, I could make out several figures seated around the table. One silhouette stood out immediately. Arabella. I opened the door. The room fell silent. 3 attorneys in tailored suits sat on one side of the long conference table. Arabella sat near the end, perfectly composed in a cream-colored blouse, her hair carefully styled like always. The moment she saw me, something flashed across her face. Shock. Real shock. But it disappeared almost instantly behind that sweet little smile she wore so well. Oh, Genevieve, she said softly. I didn't think you were coming today. There it was. Confirmation. Every word Nico told me suddenly felt terrifyingly real. I set my purse down carefully and looked directly at her. Of course I came. This concerns my husband's estate. The lead attorney, Ashford himself, motioned toward an empty chair. Please sit down, Mrs. Blackwood. We have several documents requiring your signature. As I sat, I noticed Arabella twisting her wedding ring nervously around her finger. She avoided looking directly at me now. That alone told me more than words could. Before anyone could continue, I spoke first. I'd like a full explanation before I sign anything. Vincent and I discussed his will many times over the years. The attorneys exchanged quick glances. A warning passed silently between them. Finally, Ashford cleared his throat. There were some amendments made in your husband's final weeks. My chest tightened. What kind of amendments? Arabella leaned forward with a carefully practiced expression of concern. Genevieve, Vincent became worried about your health near the end. I stared at her. My health. He noticed increasing confusion, she continued gently. Memory lapses. Difficulty managing daily responsibilities. The room suddenly felt too small. Too warm. One of the attorneys slid a thick folder across the table toward me. We've documented several concerning incidents reported by family members. My fingers trembled as I opened it. Inside were pages of statements, medical summaries, typed observations. Then I saw it. Arabella's handwriting. Dated 6 weeks earlier. Genevieve became agitated during a grocery trip and accused Damien of trying to steal from her after forgetting what she had purchased. I looked up so fast my chair nearly scraped backward. That never happened. Arabella's expression softened into fake sympathy. You were upset, Genevieve. We understood it wasn't really your fault. I felt something inside me crack. I felt something colder than fear settle inside me. Cold, sharp anger. I flipped through more pages. Claims that I forgot appointments. Forgot names. Mismanaged bills. Accused family members of lying to me. Every word was fiction. Carefully written fiction. What exactly are you trying to do here? I asked quietly. Ashford folded his hands together. Your husband established a trust before his passing. Your son Damien was designated to oversee the estate and ensure your long-term care. For a second I genuinely couldn't breathe. Vincent would never have done that. Never. Not without discussing it with me. I handled nearly every financial decision in our marriage. The investments. The taxes. The accounts. Half the time Vincent joked I was smarter with money than his accountant. This is absurd, I said. It's about protecting you, Arabella replied quickly. Vincent loved you. He just wanted you cared for. I turned toward her slowly. And that was when I noticed something sitting near the corner of the room. A small recording device. Its red light blinking steadily. You're recording this? The attorney shifted uncomfortably. It's standard procedure, Ashford said. Standard procedure to secretly record a widow while telling her she's mentally incompetent? Nobody answered. The silence was answer enough. Then came a knock at the door. A young secretary stepped inside nervously. Mr. Ashford. There's someone here asking to speak with you. We're busy, Ashford snapped. He says it's urgent. His name is Nico Moretti. The reaction around the room was immediate. Arabella went pale so fast it honestly startled me. Ashford's jaw tightened. I don't know anyone by that name, he said sharply. Tell security to remove him. Actually, I said, rising slowly from my chair, I'd like to hear what he has to say. Genevieve, Arabella said quickly, panic creeping into her voice. This isn't necessary. But it was already too late. Before anyone could stop him, Nico stepped into the room behind a group of exiting clients. He looked cleaned up compared to the parking garage, though still completely out of place among the expensive suits and polished furniture. But unlike everyone else in that room, he looked me directly in the eye. Mrs. Blackwood, he said calmly, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's something you deserve to see. Ashford stood abruptly. You're trespassing. Then call security, Nico replied evenly. But before they arrive, maybe you should explain why I have copies of the original estate documents. The entire room froze. And for the first time since I arrived, Arabella looked truly afraid. The room went completely silent. Not the normal kind of silence either. The heavy kind. The kind where nobody breathes because everyone suddenly knows the truth is about to explode. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears as Nico calmly opened his worn messenger bag and pulled out a thick manila folder. I made copies before they fired me, he said. Your husband's original will. Dated 6 months ago. And the actual medical reports from his doctor. He glanced toward the attorneys. Not the fake ones they created. Arabella shot to her feet so fast her chair scraped sharply against the floor. I don't feel well. Sit down, Arabella. Even I barely recognized my own voice. Cold. Steady. Done being fooled. Her eyes widened at me for a second before she slowly lowered herself back into the chair. Nico spread several documents across the table. Mrs. Blackwood, your husband never changed his will. These attorneys worked with your daughter-in-law to fabricate documents claiming you were mentally unfit. That's ridiculous, Ashford snapped immediately. This man is unstable. Nico didn't even flinch. You mean unstable enough to keep copies of your payment records? That landed hard. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Arabella made a small choking sound in the back of her throat and collapsed against the chair. Her face drained completely white. For one terrible moment I thought she'd fainted. But her eyes were still open. Frantic. Searching for a way out. I looked directly at her. Why? My voice barely came out above a whisper. Why would you do this to me? Her mouth trembled. We had debts. The words came broken and uneven. Damien's business started failing. The mortgage, credit cards. Everything spiraled. You needed money, I said quietly. Her eyes filled with tears. We were going to take care of you. The nerve of that nearly took my breath away. You were going to control me, I corrected. Nobody denied it. Nico slid another document toward me carefully. This is the real will. My hand shook as I picked it up. And there it was. Vincent's signature. Real. Familiar. The same steady handwriting I watched him use for 42 years. Seeing it hit me harder than I expected. Because this wasn't just about money anymore. They had tried to rewrite my husband's final wishes. Tried to turn his love for me into a weapon against me. Tears blurred my vision for a second. I swallowed them down. How long? I asked Arabella without looking up. How long were you planning this? Mascara streaked down her cheeks now. It wasn't supposed to hurt you. I almost laughed at that. Not because it was funny. Because it was unbelievable. Ashford suddenly began gathering papers in a hurry. Mrs. Blackwood, perhaps this meeting should be postponed while we sort through. No. The word cut through the room cleanly. We are not postponing anything. For the first time since Vincent died, I felt something stronger than grief. Clarity. I looked around that conference room slowly. At the attorneys willing to forge documents for money. At the woman who sat at my Thanksgiving table for 8 years while quietly building a case against me. And then at Nico. A man with nothing left to gain. A man everyone in that office dismissed because of how he looked. Yet he was the only honest person in the room. What happens now? I asked him. Nico reached calmly for his phone. Now we call the police. At that, Arabella let out one broken little sob before her body finally gave out for real. She slumped sideways in the chair unconscious. But strangely, I felt nothing. No panic. No sympathy. The woman lying there wasn't the daughter-in-law I thought I knew. That woman had probably never existed. The police arrived about 20 minutes later, though it felt much longer. Arabella had regained consciousness by then. But something about her had changed completely. She'd stopped pretending. The sweet smiles were gone. The soft voice. The concerned expressions. All gone. She just looked tired now. Cornered. Detective Elena Park introduced herself with calm professionalism. She appeared close to my age, sharp-eyed and observant in a way that immediately made me trust her. She reviewed Nico's documents carefully before looking at me. Mrs. Blackwood, she said gently, I need you to tell me about your relationship with your daughter-in-law. Start from the beginning. And suddenly I found myself thinking back 8 years. Back to when Damien first brought Arabella home. She'd been 25 then. Pretty. Polite. Working as a dental hygienist. Vincent adored her immediately. Honestly, so did I. She was perfect, I admitted quietly. Detective Park watched me closely. Too perfect, I corrected myself. And the moment I said it, old memories started rearranging themselves in my mind like shattered glass finally forming a picture. About 3 years earlier, Arabella had started making small comments. Tiny things. Easy to dismiss. Questions like, didn't we already talk about that? Or, you must have forgotten. Sometimes she'd casually mention conversations I knew never happened. At the time I thought maybe grief and stress were making me distracted. Now I understood what she was doing. Planting doubt slowly, patiently, making me question myself little by little. Genevieve, I was worried about you, Arabella whispered weakly from across the room. No, I said firmly. I surprised even myself with how steady I sounded. You were building a story. Detective Park turned toward Nico next. What exactly did you witness? Nico pulled out a small notebook. About 6 months ago, Mrs. Blackwood began visiting the office regularly, he explained. At first, Mr. Ashford claimed it was normal estate planning. He flipped a page. But then the meetings became private. Locked doors. Restricted files. His jaw tightened. She brought in supposed medical records. Statements from relatives. Photos. What kind of photos? The detective asked. Nico looked disgusted. Pictures taken from a distance. Grocery stores. Banks. Family gatherings. My stomach twisted. One photo showed Mrs. Blackwood at a checkout counter, he continued. Arabella claimed she'd become confused and couldn't complete the transaction. I closed my eyes briefly. I remembered that day. I'd spent 15 minutes talking to the cashier about her daughter's wedding while my groceries were bagged. That was all. But through the right angle, with the right caption, they turned ordinary moments into evidence against me. And suddenly I realized something terrifying. This hadn't been impulsive. It had been planned for years. You were following me? I could barely get the words out. Taking pictures of me? Arabella stared down at her hands. I needed documentation, she whispered. The attorney said they needed evidence. Evidence of what? I snapped. Me grocery shopping? Me living my life. Detective Park kept writing calmly while the room fell silent again. Then she looked up. Mrs. Blackwood, were you aware your son and daughter-in-law were having financial problems? I shook my head slowly. Damien always acted like everything was fine. His business looked successful. They live in a beautiful house. Arabella gave a hollow laugh that sounded close to breaking. That house has 2 mortgages. I stared at her. The business barely survives month to month, she continued. The vacations were charged to credit cards. Everything was. Her voice cracked. We owe over $300,000. The number hit me like ice water. 300,000. I honestly couldn't even process it. How? I whispered. Damien's business started collapsing 2 years ago, she admitted. He kept borrowing money trying to save it. He thought things would recover before anyone noticed. And when Vincent got sick, Nico said quietly from across the room, they saw the inheritance as their escape plan. Arabella's eyes filled again. We didn't know what else to do. I looked at her in disbelief. You could have asked us for help. That was the part one couldn't understand. Vincent would have done anything for Damien. Anything. If our son had come to us honestly, Vincent probably would have written a check the same day. But instead, they built a lie around me. It wasn't supposed to be stealing, Arabella said weakly. You would have been cared for. Nico let out a short bitter laugh. An allowance isn't care. Everyone looked at him. I saw the trust calculations, he said. They planned to give Mrs. Blackwood $40,000 a year while the rest of the estate paid off their debts. My stomach turned. $40,000. From my own husband's estate. Money Vincent worked his entire life to build. And they intended to ration it back to me while using the rest to save themselves. The humiliation of it burned deeper than the money ever could. This wasn't just theft. It was control. They planned to manage my life like I was a child. I turned slowly toward Arabella. Does Damien know? She hesitated. And that hesitation answered everything before she even spoke. He knows about the debts, she admitted quietly. And he believed Vincent changed the will. My chest tightened. But he doesn't know the documents were fake? She shook her head. I told him Vincent became concerned about your memory. Detective Park looked up sharply. You convinced your husband his mother was mentally declining? Arabella nodded miserably. I started mentioning little things over time. Small stories. Incidents. The room suddenly felt colder. What incidents? I asked. Her eyes closed briefly. I told him you left the stove on once. My jaw tightened. That you got lost driving home. Another lie. That you accused the mailman of stealing. I stared at her in complete disbelief. That you hid cash around the house and forgot where you put it. Each sentence felt like another knife sliding deeper. None of it had happened. Not one word. And somehow, over months and years, she had slowly poisoned my son against me. Not with screaming arguments. Not with dramatic accusations. With whispers. Carefully placed doubts. The kind that grow quietly in someone's mind until they start feeling true. "I know it was wrong," she whispered. But by then sorry meant nothing. Detective Park finally closed her notebook. "Mrs. Blackwood, I'll need a formal statement downtown. We'll also be taking all documents related to this case." Then she turned toward the attorneys. "And gentlemen, your firm's involvement will be investigated as well." Ashford immediately straightened in his chair. "Detective, we were operating on information provided by our client. If anything was inaccurate, then we're victims too." Nico actually laughed out loud. "Victims?" He pulled another document from his folder. "You charged $50,000 for forged reports and fabricated evidence." Ashford's face drained instantly. "That's not." "Save it," Detective Park interrupted. The attorneys finally stopped talking after that. As officers gathered paperwork and photographed evidence, I sat there staring at Arabella. Really staring at her. Not the version of her I thought I knew. The real woman underneath. "The last 8 years," I said quietly. "Was any of it real?" Her face crumpled. "At first, yes." That answer hurt more than if she'd said no. "When I married Damien, I really did love your family," she whispered. "I loved you and Vincent. But then the money problems started." She didn't need to finish. I understood. Fear changes people. Desperation changes them faster. Somewhere along the line, survival became more important to her than decency. And little by little, she turned me into an obstacle. As Detective Park prepared to escort everyone out, a horrifying realization suddenly washed over me. If Nico hadn't stopped me in that parking garage, I would have signed those papers. I would have believed Vincent lost faith in me before he died. I would have spent the rest of my life carrying that pain, thinking my husband's final opinion of me was disappointment. The thought nearly broke me. My knees actually weakened beneath me, forcing me back into the chair. But then I looked over at Nico. This tired man everyone ignored. This man who had lost his career and probably much more. He had given me something priceless. Not the inheritance. The truth. The certainty that Vincent trusted me until his very last breath. And suddenly I realized I owed Nico more than I could ever repay. 3 days later, I sat alone in my kitchen staring at my phone. Damien had called 17 times. 17. I hadn't answered a single one. Because I still didn't know what I was going to hear in his voice. Regret? Anger? Excuses? And honestly, I wasn't sure I was ready for any of them. Meanwhile, Nico had checked on me twice already. Bringing copies of documents. Making sure I'd eaten. Asking if I needed anything. Funny how the man living out of his car showed me more loyalty than the people sitting at my holiday table for 8 years. The doorbell rang exactly at 7 that evening. I already knew who it would be. Through the peephole, I saw Damien standing on my porch looking like he hadn't slept in days. His hair was messy, his shoulders slumped, dark circles under his eyes. Arabella stood beside him, strangely smaller somehow. Not physically. Emotionally. Like the confidence had drained out of her completely. I opened the door but didn't smile. "Mom," Damien said. Just that one word nearly cracked his voice. "We need to talk." I studied him carefully. My son. 33 years old. The little boy who used to run into my arms after school now stood on my porch looking like a stranger carrying someone else's sins. "Do we?" I asked quietly. "Please." I stepped aside without answering. They walked into the living room and sat on the couch Vincent and I bought 15 years earlier. Suddenly every memory attached to that room felt different. Birthdays. Christmas mornings. Family dinners. All of it now shadowed by lies I never saw coming. Damien leaned forward immediately. Detective Park told me everything. I stayed standing. The forged documents. The fake medical reports. The lies about Dad changing the will. His eyes filled instantly. "Mom, I swear to you, I never saw the actual paperwork. Arabella handled everything directly with the attorneys." I looked at him for a long moment. Then I asked the only thing that mattered. "But you knew about the debts." His face crumpled. "Yes." The word barely came out. "We're drowning financially. The business started failing and I kept borrowing money trying to keep it alive. I was too ashamed to tell you and Dad." I folded my arms tighter. So when Vincent got sick, you started thinking about the inheritance. Damien winced hard. Not like that. Then how? For the first time since they arrived, Arabella finally spoke. Damien, she said softly, tell her everything. I looked at her in surprise. Gone was the polished woman from the law office. Gone was the calm manipulation. Now she just looked exhausted. Damien rubbed both hands over his face. When Dad got diagnosed, I panicked, he admitted. I started worrying about you being alone after he was gone. Managing the house. The finances. Everything. I'm 64, Damien, I said evenly. Not 94. I know that now. But then he looked toward Arabella. She started pointing out things. Moments where you supposedly seemed confused. My anger stirred again immediately. What moments? Damien swallowed hard. Like when you forgot about dinner plans last Christmas. I stared at him. You canceled those plans because Arabella had the flu. His eyes flickered uncertainly. Or when you forgot the neighbor's dog's name. His dog is named Butterscotch. I remembered perfectly. Damien looked shaken now. And the milk in the pantry, he added weakly. I almost laughed from disbelief. I worked outside in the heat for 3 hours that day. The room went silent. For the first time, I watched genuine confusion spread across my son's face. But Arabella said. Arabella lied. The words landed hard. Simple. Final. Arabella lowered her head as tears slipped down her cheeks. I twisted things, she whispered. Normal moments. Small mistakes everybody makes. I made them sound worse. Damien turned toward her slowly. Almost like he no longer recognized the woman beside him. Why? She finally broke then. Because we were losing everything. The desperation in her voice filled the room. Your business was collapsing. The bills kept growing. I didn't know what else to do. You could have asked us for help, I said. But even as I said it, I realized pride had probably already poisoned that option long ago. Damien stared at his wife in disbelief. You made me think my mother was declining. Arabella covered her face. I thought if you believed she needed help, you'd support us managing the estate. Managing? I repeated sharply. You mean controlling? No, she said quickly. We were going to take care of you. $40,000 a year? The room froze. Damien looked up sharply. What? I looked directly at him. Ask your wife about the trust fund arrangement. His forehead creased. What trust? I saw panic flash across Arabella's face again. The lawyers drafted paperwork giving me a yearly allowance, while the rest of Vincent's estate paid off your debts. Damien slowly turned toward her. And I watched the realization hit him piece by piece. Like glass breaking silently behind his eyes. Arabella, he whispered. She couldn't look at him. The attorney said it protected everybody. Damien shot to his feet so fast the coffee table rattled. Protected everybody? His voice cracked with fury. You were going to steal from my mother. We were desperate. Arabella shouted back, finally losing control completely. You were too proud to admit we were failing. And your solution was destroying my mother? The pain in his voice hit harder than the shouting. Because suddenly I could see it clearly. Damien really hadn't known the full truth. Arabella manipulated him the same way she manipulated everyone else. Slowly. Quietly. One suggestion at a time. She used his fear for me. His grief over Vincent. His desperation over money. And she turned all of it into doubt. Damien, I said softly. He sat back down heavily, looking shattered. I took a slow breath before speaking again. Your father never doubted me. Damien looked up immediately. Not once, I continued. Vincent trusted me completely until the day he died. He never changed that will. He never questioned my judgment. Damien broke apart after that. Full sobs. The kind that come from deep shame. I'm sorry, Mom, he choked out. I should have known better. Yes, I said honestly. You should have. The truth hurt him. But I wasn't interested in comforting lies anymore. I turned toward Arabella again. How long? She looked exhausted now. When did I stop being family and start becoming a financial solution? Her voice came out barely audible. When we realized how much the estate was worth. I felt my stomach tighten. Over $2 million, she whispered. That money could have fixed everything. And just like that, there it was. The real reason. Not concern. Not protection. Greed wrapped in desperation. That money was Vincent's life's work, I said quietly. Every dollar in that estate came from decades of sacrifice, long hours, careful planning, and promises we made to each other about growing old together. Arabella suddenly looked up, and for the first time since arriving at my house, I saw something ugly break through her tears. Resentment. From where we stood, it felt impossible watching so much security sit untouched while everything around us collapsed, she said bitterly. There it was. The truth underneath all the fake concern and soft voices. She believed she deserved Vincent's money more than I did, because she would spend it, because she wanted it more. Damien stared at her like he'd never seen her before. Arabella, how can you even say that? Because it's true, she shouted. We were drowning while she sat on millions. I felt something inside me harden completely. Not grief. Not anger anymore. Clarity. That money was never yours to count. Arabella stood abruptly. You have no idea what pressure we were under. And you had no idea what loyalty means, I replied. Silence swallowed the room after that. The only sounds were Arabella's uneven breathing and the ticking of the old clock above the fireplace. Finally Damien looked up at me. What happens now, Mom? I've been asking myself that same question for 3 days. What happens after betrayal like this? After lies this deep? Could any family survive it? I looked at my son carefully. The guilt on his face was real. The heartbreak was real too. Then I looked at Arabella. Even now, part of her still believed desperation justified everything she'd done. That depends, I said slowly, on whether either of you are finally ready to tell the truth. Nobody spoke for a long moment. Then Damien nodded. I'll tell you everything. He rubbed both hands over his face like he was trying to wake up from a nightmare. I really thought I was helping you. How? I asked quietly. What exactly did she tell you? Damien glanced toward Arabella before answering. She said Dad was worried about leaving you alone. That he'd mentioned concerns during doctor appointments. A cold chill ran through me instantly. Doctor appointments? Damien nodded slowly. Sometimes when I was working, Arabella drove Dad. I turned toward her immediately. And suddenly every memory from Vincent's final months felt poisoned. You used my husband's illness. Arabella's eyes filled again. Vincent never actually said those things, she admitted softly. But he was weak. Vulnerable. It made the conversations easier. My stomach turned. What conversations? I'd mentioned how dependent he'd become, she said quietly. How hard things might be for you alone afterward. I framed it like concern. Concern. That word again. Always concern. Never greed. Never manipulation. Just concern wrapped neatly enough to sound caring. What else? I asked. Arabella wiped her face with trembling hands. I started watching everything you did. The room suddenly felt colder. Every time you misplaced your keys. Every time you forgot something small. Every time you asked someone to repeat themselves. She swallowed hard. I'd mention it to Damien later. Casually. Like I was worried. I looked at my son. And you believed her. Damien looked sick. She never made dramatic accusations. That's why it worked. It happened slowly. That was the terrifying part. Not some giant lie. Hundreds of tiny ones. So small they seemed harmless. Until eventually they became a pattern. A story. A false version of me built piece by piece inside my own son's mind. Then another realization hit me. The photographs. Arabella looked away instantly. When did you start following me? About 4 months ago. My chest tightened. The attorney said they needed evidence if we were going to challenge your competency. I stared at her. Challenge my competency. Hearing the words out loud made them feel even more horrifying. You plan to have me declared mentally unfit. No, Damien said quickly. That's not how I understood it. Arabella turned sharply toward him. That's exactly what we discussed. Damien looked stunned. Arabella told me it was temporary financial oversight until things stabilized. The attorney said financial supervision would protect her. Arabella argued. Protected. There was that word again. I almost couldn't stand hearing it anymore. Protected me from what? I asked sharply. Making bad financial decisions, she replied. You mean decisions you didn't like? The tension in the room became unbearable. Arabella's composure cracked again. Do you have any idea what it's like losing everything? She cried. The calls from creditors? Wondering if you'll lose your house. I looked at her steadily. Do you have any idea what it feels like discovering your own family plan to take away your rights? That shut her up instantly. Because beneath every excuse, every justification, every tear, that was the truth. They weren't just trying to take Vincent's money. They were trying to take my independence, my dignity, my voice. Damien looked physically ill now. The trust would have taken care of you, he said weakly. I stared at him for a long moment before answering. Your father trusted me with his entire life. My voice stayed calm. But somewhere along the way, my own son stopped trusting me with my own. Damien, I said more gently this time because I could finally see the truth sinking in for him. That trust wasn't designed to protect me. He looked up slowly. It would have given me $40,000 a year while the rest of Vincent's estate paid off your debts. His forehead tightened. And after the money was gone? I asked quietly. I watched the answer hit him before he spoke it. There wouldn't have been anything left. Nothing, I confirmed. I looked around the living room Vincent and I built together over decades. Your father worked 45 years for that money. He saved carefully, invested carefully, planned carefully. He wanted me secure after he was gone. My voice stayed calm, but every word landed heavier than the last. Your wife's plan would have destroyed all of it within 5 years. Arabella stood abruptly, her face red with frustration. You make this sound so simple, Genevieve. I looked at her steadily. Simple. You've never faced losing everything, she snapped. You don't know what desperation feels like. You're right, I said quietly. I don't. Then I took a slow breath. But I do know what betrayal feels like. That shut the room down again. I know what it feels like discovering someone I treated like family was secretly building a case against me. Arabella's expression cracked. I wasn't trying to destroy you. You were trying to save yourself, I replied. At my expense. For the first time since this nightmare started, she didn't argue. She just stood there staring at me. And I think finally she understood what she'd actually done. Damien walked to the window and looked out at the backyard garden Vincent and I planted together 20 years earlier. The silence stretched for several seconds before he finally spoke. What happens to us now? It was the question I'd been avoiding since the parking garage. Because the truth was painful. I honestly didn't know if our family could survive this. Trust can survive mistakes. But calculated betrayal? That's harder. The attorneys will be charged, I said. Nico gave Detective Park enough evidence to prove fraud and forgery. Damien nodded slowly. And Arabella? I looked toward her. That depends on what she chooses next. Her eyes narrowed slightly. What does that mean? Detective Park said the district attorney may offer a plea agreement if you fully cooperate. Arabella swallowed hard. And if I don't? Then you face the full charges. Nobody spoke. The reality of prison finally settled visibly across her face. Nico's evidence had left very little room to escape. She slowly sat back down. What kind of plea agreement? I don't know, I admitted. That depends on prosecutors. Then I leaned forward slightly. But understand something clearly, Arabella. She looked at me. Even if you avoid prison, this doesn't disappear. Her eyes filled again. You tried to take away my independence. You manipulated my son. You used my husband's illness to push your lies. I know, she whispered. Do you? The question came sharper than I intended. Because even now, part of me still heard excuses every time she spoke. 5 minutes earlier she'd still been arguing I didn't deserve the money Vincent left me. Finally her shoulders sagged. I was wrong. No justification. No explanation. Just those 3 words. And strangely, that was the first honest thing I'd heard from her in months. I let fear turn me into someone awful, she said quietly. Someone I don't even recognize anymore. I studied her carefully. Maybe she meant it. Maybe not. Sometimes remorse comes because people regret what they did. And sometimes it comes because they got caught. Only time reveals the difference. Damien finally turned back from the window. Mom, is there any chance we can fix this? The pain in his voice nearly broke my heart. Because despite everything, he was still my son. I looked at him for a long moment before answering honestly. I don't know. That hurt him. I could see it. But false hope would have been another lie. And we'd already had enough of those. What I do know, I continued, is that accountability comes first. They both waited silently. Arabella has to cooperate fully. No more lies. No more excuses. She testifies against the attorneys and accepts whatever consequences come. Then I looked at Damien. And you have to decide whether you can stay married to someone who did this. His face crumpled instantly. She's my wife. I know. I love her. I know that too. My voice softened despite everything. But love without trust eventually destroys people. Damien lowered his eyes. Because deep down he already knew that. She lied to you too, I said gently. She used your fear for me. Your grief over your father. Your love for your family. Arabella suddenly leaned forward desperately. I can change. I met her eyes. Can you? She froze. Because this wasn't one bad decision made in panic. This was months of planning. Months of watching me smile at family dinners while quietly building a future where I lost control over my own life. That kind of betrayal doesn't happen accidentally. Outside, children laughed somewhere down the street. The sound felt strangely distant. Like normal life continuing while mine had split into two separate versions. The life before I knew the truth. And the life after. What do you want from us? Damien asked quietly. I thought about that carefully before answering. I want both of you to decide who you are going forward. Neither of them spoke. Because eventually, I continued. Every person reaches a moment where excuses stop mattering. And character is all that's left. 6 months later, I sat alone in my garden on a cool October morning, watching the leaves change colors around the maple tree Vincent, and I planted for Damien's 10th birthday. Funny how seasons mirror people sometimes. Things that seem permanent can change completely before you realize it. Arabella accepted the plea deal. 3 years probation. Community service. Full financial restitution. Ashford received 4 years in prison. The other attorneys got 2 each. And for the first time in a very long while, justice had finally arrived quietly. Nico's testimony ended up being the reason the entire case held together. Every receipt he copied. Every document he saved. Every note he kept. Without him, those lawyers probably would have walked away claiming it was all a misunderstanding. Instead, they faced real consequences. But courtrooms only settle the legal part of betrayal. The emotional damage takes much longer. Damien moved out 3 weeks after the night they came to my house. He rented a tiny apartment downtown and started over from scratch. No luxury neighborhood. No expensive cars. No pretending anymore. During one of our weekly coffee meetings, he admitted something that stayed with me. I keep replaying everything in my head, he said quietly. Every conversation. Every memory. I don't even know which thoughts were really mine anymore. I understood exactly what he meant. I'd done the same thing for months. Trying to separate reality from the version of reality Arabella slowly built around us. The divorce was nearly finalized by then. And as attorneys dug deeper into their finances, even more lies surfaced. Credit cards opened in Damien's name. Loans against his business. Hidden spending. Debt piled on top of debt. The situation was far worse than either of us realized. I offered to help him financially more than once. Each time he refused. Mom, I can't use your money to fix damage connected to all this, he told me. I need to rebuild honestly. It hurt watching him struggle. But secretly I respected him more for it. He sold the house in Silverbrook Heights. Traded his BMW for an old Honda. Worked exhausting hours rebuilding his consulting business one client at a time. And slowly, I started seeing my son again. Not the confused man manipulated by fear and guilt. The man Vincent and I raised. Meanwhile, Nico became an unexpected part of my daily life. I hired him to help maintain the property, and he moved into the small apartment above Vincent's old workshop. Watching him rebuild himself was one of the few genuinely hopeful things to come from all of this. A few months earlier, he'd been sleeping in his car. Now he had steady work, clean clothes, and peace in his eyes again. Mrs. W. He called one chilly October morning as he crossed the yard carrying 2 cups of coffee. Thought you might need company. I smiled. Always. He sat beside me overlooking the garden. How are you feeling about today? He asked. I knew what he meant. That afternoon, Arabella's probation officer would be checking her community service hours. Part of her plea agreement required her to work at a local food bank. The irony wasn't lost on either of us, especially because people like Nico were exactly the kind of people she once looked down on. I hope she's learning something, Nico said quietly. Then after a pause, he added something that stuck with me. Not everybody who gets desperate loses their conscience. He would know. Nico lost almost everything. His career, his stability, his home. But when given the chance to profit from someone else's suffering, he chose honesty anyway. That matters. Have you seen her? I asked. He nodded slowly. Sometimes at the food bank. She works hard. Keeps mostly to herself. I looked out across the yard. I don't know whether I want her punished or healed. Maybe both, Nico said gently. Maybe he was right. Because as angry as I'd been, I didn't actually want Arabella destroyed. I wanted her changed. There's a difference. My phone buzzed in my lap. A message from Damien. Coffee later? I have news. I showed Nico the text. He grinned slightly. Good news. With Damien lately? I said. Usually it's complicated. That afternoon, Damien walked into my kitchen looking healthier than he had in months. The exhaustion was still there but lighter somehow. There was color back in his face. Life back in his eyes. You look better, I told him. I feel better. And for the first time in a long time I believed him. He pulled out his phone and showed me a picture of a small storefront office. Blackwood Advisory. His name. His business. No hidden loans. No fake success. Just honest work. I signed the lease yesterday, he said proudly. My chest tightened instantly. Vincent would have loved that moment. Your father would be proud of you, I told him softly. Damien looked down at the photo for a second. I've been thinking about Dad a lot lately, he admitted. About the kind of man he tried to raise me to be. He looked up at me then. I lost my way for a while. We both did, I said gently. He reached across the kitchen table and took my hand. Mom, can you really forgive me? That question carried more weight than anything else he'd asked since all this started. Not because I didn't love him. Because forgiveness is harder when someone you love helped hurt you. Even unintentionally. I took my time answering. Forgiveness isn't one decision, I said carefully. It's something I choose over and over. He nodded slowly. Some days were easier than others. But I also knew something important. Damien had been manipulated too. Not innocent. But manipulated. Yes, I finally said. I forgive you. His eyes filled instantly. I should have trusted you. You should have. I didn't soften that truth anymore. We'd both learned honesty mattered more than comfort. But we can't change what happened, I continued. We can only decide what kind of relationship we build from here. Damien wiped at his eyes quickly. What does that look like? It looks like honesty, I said. Real honesty. Even when it's uncomfortable. He listened quietly. It means asking for help before things fall apart. It means telling the truth when you're struggling instead of hiding behind pride. A small smile finally touched his face. And if I mess up again? I smiled back. Then we deal with it together. Because 6 months earlier I almost lost my son completely. Not to greed. Not even to manipulation. But to silence. And neither of us intended to make that mistake again. Maybe that understanding would help both of us avoid the same mistakes again. Damien nodded slowly, like the words had settled somewhere deep inside him. We sat quietly for a while after that. Not an awkward silence. The kind that only exists between people who have finally stopped hiding from each other. Eventually he looked up again. What about Arabella? I already knew what he meant. Do you think you'll ever forgive her? I thought about it carefully before answering. Because forgiveness sounds simple when people talk about it. But betrayal changes the meaning of that word. I don't know, I admitted. What she did wasn't impulsive. It wasn't one terrible decision made in panic. I stared down into my coffee for a second. She spent months building lies around me, watching me, manipulating people I loved. Damien stayed silent. And part of her enjoyed it, I added quietly. That's the hardest part for me to forget. She says she's changed. Maybe she has. I meant that honestly. People can change. Fear changes people. Shame changes them too. But healing and trust are not the same thing. I've stopped carrying the anger, I said finally. Damien frowned slightly. So you forgive her? No. I shook my head gently. I've let go of the resentment. That's different. He listened carefully. Forgiveness doesn't automatically mean access, I continued. And it certainly doesn't mean trust. The truth sat heavy between us. Arabella will never be part of my life again. Saying it out loud felt strangely peaceful. Not bitter. Certain. But I won't let her take any more from me either, I said. Not my peace. Not my future. Damien nodded slowly. I think I understand. When he finally stood to leave, I walked him to the front door. Outside, the sky was glowing deep orange and purple as the sun disappeared behind the trees. Vincent loved sunsets like that. We used to sit on the back porch for hours watching the sky change colors while talking about the future. Back then, growing older together felt endless. At the door, Damien hugged me tightly. Thank you for not giving up on me, Mom. I held him a little tighter before letting go. Thank you for finding your way back. After he left, I walked slowly through the house Vincent and I built together over 42 years. For a long time after his death, I thought silence meant loneliness. Now I understood the difference. The house was quiet, but my life wasn't empty. I had people who truly cared about me. Nico, whose courage saved me when he owed me nothing. Damien, rebuilding himself honestly one painful step at a time. Detective Park, who still called occasionally just to check on me. Even the volunteers at the food bank had become unexpected friends after I started helping there myself. Life had surprised me. Again and again. A few months earlier I thought my story was ending. Instead, it was beginning again. I started tutoring adults at the local library who were learning to read later in life. Nico and I expanded the garden behind Vincent's workshop. And with Detective Park's encouragement, I began speaking to senior groups about financial exploitation and manipulation. Turns out, more people needed that warning than I ever realized. But the biggest thing I reclaimed was myself. For months, Arabella tried to turn me into a helpless old woman in everyone's eyes. Confused, fragile, incompetent. But none of that was ever true. I was strong. I was capable. I was a woman who survived grief, betrayal, and humiliation without losing herself. That matters. That evening, I sat alone on the back porch with a cup of tea as stars slowly appeared overhead. And for the first time in years, I felt completely at peace. Not because life had become perfect. Not because the pain disappeared. But because I finally understood my own worth without needing anyone else to confirm it. Vincent's love still surrounded me. In the life we built. In the values we taught our son. In the strength he always believed I had. Arabella's lies failed because they were built on greed. But my marriage, my family, and my identity had been built on something stronger. Truth. I was 64 years old. And somehow, after everything, for the first time in years, my life finally felt like my own again. 6 months earlier, I never would have believed that was possible. Now it felt undeniable. What they tried to take from me wasn't money. It was my sense of self. And in the end, I kept it. And now I want to ask you something. What would you have done in my place? Have you ever experienced betrayal from someone you trusted? Tell me in the comments. And before you go, the next 2 stories on your screen are some of the most unforgettable stories on this channel. If this one stayed with you, I think those will too. Thank you for staying with me until the very end.